coach, and today I want to talk about emotions and veterinary medicine. So, a lot of us think about our jobs and we think about what we don't like in veterinary medicine, and it comes down to stress and anxiety for most of us. And so, when we start to think about leaving our professions, it's stress and anxiety that we cite as the reasons as well. What I want us to start to understand is that we kind of have it wrong when it comes to the causes of the stress and anxiety that we feel, and it's actually pretty normal that we do have it wrong. When we go through all of the training that is required of us to become veterinarians and veterinary technicians, we're nose down in the books for years and years and years. And then we finally graduate, we finally get to do the jobs that we have been working so hard to be able to do. And once we're in those new jobs, we start to feel a lot of anxiety and stress. There's lots of reasons why that happens. It's a new environment, there's a lot of uncertainty. And along with that, because we don't like the way it feels, we associate our new jobs with the creation of that stress and anxiety. But what if at this stage in your life you were going to feel it anyway? What if that's just all part of just growing and evolving and developing your emotional resilience, your emotional maturity, and it didn't really matter where you were at this point in your life, that you were going to feel it anyway? I think that this is actually pretty true. Because once you get out of being in student mode and you start to get into the real world, I don't care where you start, there's going to be a bit of an emotional consequence. A lot of the time, our brain just wants to connect the sequence of events with the way that we feel, and so it wants to blame that for it. What I want us to recognize is that as we step into these roles in veterinary medicine, the emotions that come up, they were going to come up anyway when we were put in a new, uncertain, unfamiliar situation. Our opportunity is to learn how to manage those emotions as they come up and to recognize where they really come from. One of the reasons this is so hard for us is because of the word feel, the way that we use it in the English language, which is often wrong. In my brand new podcast, episode 4, I actually talk about this at length, so I'd love for you guys to check it out. But just briefly, I want to point out what I'm talking about. When we think about why we're stressed out, or why we're angry, or why we're upset, if we ask ourselves why, so if I walk out of an exam room, for example, and I'm feeling frustrated, somebody might say, why? What's wrong? What's going on? How do you feel? They're probably not going to ask you how do you feel, but they're going to say what's going on. And what we're going to say is I feel like the client doesn't understand what I'm saying. I feel like no matter what I do, they're never going to take my recommendations. And so we think that we're stressed out because we feel like the clients are never going to take our recommendations. They're never going to respect our authority. You can come up with a million sentences that you've used. And what I want us to see is that when we use the word feel in that way, we're actually using the word feel as if it's a synonym for believe or as if it's a synonym for think. And we miss the emotion that it's actually creating. We don't feel a certain way because of what a client is saying or doing. It's what we believe about it. So when we walk out of there and we're like, oh, I'm so frustrated. I feel like she just doesn't understand what I'm trying to tell her. I feel like no matter what I say, they don't listen to my advice. What we're really saying is, I believe they never listen to my advice, and that makes me feel frustrated. I think it doesn't matter how many times I explain it, they're never going to get it, and that makes me feel frustrated. That makes me feel inadequate. That makes me feel whatever it is, the emotion is. But because we cover up the emotion with the word feel, and then that word feel in the way that we're using it, it kind of delegates the responsibility for whatever the stress is that we feel to the thing that we're talking about. We miss what the thing is. We label it all as a stress and anxiety. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Stress and anxiety are bucket emotions. They're just layers of lots of different emotions going on at the same time. And if we say, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, and somebody says, why? And we say, because I feel like I can work really, really hard and never get caught up. That would be something pretty common, right? I'm so stressed. I feel like I work really hard, but I never get caught up. Well, what's actually happening is I believe I work really hard and I never get caught up, and that makes me feel something, insert emotion. Stress, that makes me feel overwhelmed. That makes me feel exhausted. There's something there other than just I feel like I never get caught up, because that's not actually grammatically correct. I know it's like a tiny little nuance, but it actually is everything, because what has happened over time is as we've continued to use the word feel in this wrong way, we have really missed the opportunity to identify what is the actual emotion. We've also then given that emotion the power of developing that emotion to something outside of us. And if it is then the things that cause the emotion. So I feel like, I educate owners all the time and they just never take my advice. If that's what we're believing, then what's happening the other side of that is that we start to decide that it's worth it to do this job if the owners actually take the advice that we give them, so that we would feel better if they would take our advice. We miss the whole point, because owners are going to take their advice or not take their advice. Our job is not based on whether or not they take the advice. Our job is to give the advice, and how we feel is not dependent on their decision. But when we use the word feel in that way, it makes it sound as if it is. What's true is that I believe that if owners don't take my advice, that it's a waste of my time. Like, if we really just give ourselves the opportunity to pick it apart, what do you believe? Replace that word feel with believe or think, and then you're going to be able to see what your mind is actually creating for you. And it is absolutely always worth your time, no matter what the clients decide. Like, clients' decisions are their decisions. They're not yours. They're not a reflection of your ability. You can only do the best you can do with the information and resources you have available at the time. Veterinary medicine just gives us this opportunity to start developing and becoming aware of all the emotions. So the emotions are there. And when we talk about stress when we're going through our academic careers, why are you stressed out? I'm stressed out because I feel like I'm never going to study enough to get the grade that I want on this test. Again, not the right use of the word feel. I believe that no matter how hard I study, I'm not going to get the grade that I want to achieve, and that makes me feel what? That makes me feel helpless. That makes me feel, again, inadequate. That makes me feel frustrated, whatever that is. But because we don't ever have the opportunity to identify that emotion, we can't actually then understand what's happening. When we're going through our academics, we repeat that cycle over and over again. And so we just kind of label that as stress and we figure out how to deal with it, right? Oh, I'm stressed about school. I'm stressed about whatever. What we're missing is that it's not the things outside of us that are causing stress. It's only the things that we're thinking and believing about them. Once we get into veterinary medicine, it's a whole new pile of variables, if you will. All the things that we have delegated our emotions to, like have said this is what's causing stress, anxiety, all of that. Anger, happiness, excitement, all those things, all the things prior to going to veterinary school or vet tech school, they were just kind of the same inputs, if you will, the same types of things happening over and over again. And we figured out our own coping mechanisms for the way that they emotionally felt for us. Now, some of the coping mechanisms were good. Some of them weren't so good. Sometimes we do buffer, overeat, overdrink, over Netflix, over shop, that kind of stuff. But we figured out a way to deal with the stress, if you will, with those normal inputs, the things that we were used to encountering day in and day out in our lives. We were students as very young people, right? Like as children, we were students. And so the kinds of stresses that we had during school, we carried those through all the way through our college years. Now we're out of that. The inputs are different. This is kind of the point of what I'm trying to say here. The inputs are different. And because the inputs are different, the emotions that we experience are different. We haven't developed coping mechanisms for that new set of emotions that's coming up.